The dust of the Arizona Territory clung to everything, a fine ochre powder that stained the sky at dawn and coated a man's lungs with every breath. For Silas Stone, a man built from the same hardened clay as the desert he'd tamed, the dust was a constant gritty companion. His hands, calloused and strong, knew the feel of a rifle stock better than a woman's touch. A decade of bounty hunting had carved lines around his eyes and set his jaw in a permanent, weary clench. His solitude wasn't a choice. It was a consequence of a past he couldn't outrun. A haunted ledger of lives taken and a soul stained by the bloody work. The one thing he ached for, the one he hadn't dared to dream of, was a family. A small, quiet ranch. A wife to share the hard days and soft evenings. A son to teach the land's secrets. So he had done the only thing a man like him could do. He had placed an advertisement. The reply was a single folded letter that smelled faintly of lavender and ink. It came from a widow in a distant eastern town. Her name was Eleanor Vance. He didn't ask for a picture. He knew the faces of women he'd seen from wanted posters, and he wanted no more portraits in his life. The letter was plain-spoken and practical. She had a small inheritance, a willingness to work, and a yearning for a new life. He, in turn, offered a home, a share of his land, and a promise of respect. They were two broken people seeking a remedy, and the arrangement felt less like a courtship and more like a pact forged in desperation. The stagecoach was due to arrive in a week. On the appointed day, a punishing sun beat down on the town of Redemption Creek. Silas stood by the dusty depot, his hands in his pockets, feeling the familiar weight of his Colt peacemaker. A lone figure disembarked from the swaying coach. A woman in a simple faded blue dress, a worn leather satchel clutched in her hand. She was thin, her frame almost bird-like, with a cascade of dark, unruly hair that refused to be tamed by her bonnet. She wasn't the woman he expected. Eleanor Vance in her letters had seemed older, more weathered. This woman looked barely old enough to be out on her own. As she stepped down, her eyes met his, and a jolt, sharp and unexpected, went through him. They weren't the eyes of a demure widow, but of a hunted animal, wide, dark, and filled with a terror she was fighting to conceal. Then came the inciting incident. A man in a stained, wide-brimmed hat stepped off the coach behind her. He had a scarred face and a glint in his eye that Silas knew all too well, the look of a predator. He was one of the men Silas had been tracking for weeks. Jed the Wolf Rollins, a known accomplice of the notorious Dalton gang. A bounty of $2,000 was on his head. Before the woman could take another step, Jed's hand shot out and clamped around her arm. "What's the hurry, little bird?" he growled, a sneer twisting his lips. "You ain't finished telling me where the rest of it is." The woman's hand went instinctively to the satchel. Her fear was no longer hidden. It was a tangible thing, a cloud of dread that clung to her. Silas's internal struggle flared to life. His entire life was dedicated to justice, to the pursuit of the wicked. His bounty hunter's instinct told him to go for his gun, to claim the reward that would make his land truly his own. But the look in her eyes, a silent, desperate plea, spoke of a different kind of duty. This wasn't about a bounty anymore. It was about protecting the woman he had promised to marry. He took a single, deliberate step forward, his voice a low rumble that cut through the silence. "Let her go, Rollins." Jed's head snapped up. He recognized the tall, grim-faced man with the quick hands and the haunted eyes. "Stone," he spat, his hand twitching towards the holster at his hip. "Stay out of this. This little dove owes me a debt." "She's my wife," Silas said, the lie feeling both foreign and profoundly true on his tongue. He moved his hand, not to his gun, but to the woman's other arm, pulling her gently but firmly out of Jed's grasp. The sudden act of possession, of claiming her, was more potent than any threat. Jed, caught off guard by the unexpected declaration, hesitated just long enough for Silas to shield her with his body. The moment was over. Jed, seeing the townsfolk's eyes turning their way, backed down with a low curse. He knew a bounty hunter's wrath, and he wasn't about to start a gunfight in the middle of a crowded street for a woman. He gave a final, venomous glare, then melted into the crowd, his shadow a promise of a return. Silas didn't wait. He led the woman away from the depot, his grip on her arm still steady. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. As they reached his wagon, she finally spoke. You said I was your wife." Her voice was a soft whisper, a stark contrast to the rough world around them. "I'm not Eleanor Vance." He stopped, turning to face her. "Then who are you?" She looked down at the dusty ground, her shoulders slumped. My name is Lily. I was on the run from a man who wanted a box my father stole. He worked for the Dalton gang. Jed Rollins. She lifted her head, her eyes brimming with a fragile hope. Eleanor Vance died in a hotel fire in Kansas City a week ago. I was her maid. I found her letters and I was desperate. I'm sorry. Her confession hung in the air between them. Silas's dream of a quiet life, of a simple, predictable remedy, shattered like glass. He had traded a bounty for a lie. But looking at her, at the raw vulnerability in her face, he saw not a deceiver but a survivor. "Get in," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "It's a long ride to my ranch." The rising action began in the silence of their journey. Lily sat on the wagon bench, her small frame dwarfed by his imposing presence. She offered to pay him back, to work off the debt of her deception, but he simply shook his head. "We'll worry about that later," he said. And the words, so devoid of judgment, were a balm to her soul. She spent the first days at his ranch in a nervous flurry of work, cleaning his Spartan cabin, mending his threadbare shirts, and cooking meals with a quiet competence that belied her fear. He found himself watching her, the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she kneaded dough, the way she hummed a soft, tuneless melody as she swept the floor. He hadn't realized how much the stillness of his life had been a silence, a profound and aching emptiness. She filled it not with noise but with a gentle, insistent presence. The first distinct plot point occurred a week later when a rider appeared on the horizon. Lily's face went white. She ran inside, snatching up her satchel and looking wildly around for a place to hide. But the rider was just an old trapper, a friend of Silas's, who had come to trade pelts for supplies. After he left, Silas found Lily huddled in the root cellar, her body trembling. He sat beside her in the dark, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and fear. "It's just Jed," she whispered. "He won't stop until he has that box. It's a list. A ledger of everyone Jed and the gang robbed. My father swore he'd use it as a bargaining chip, but he was killed before he could. Jed knows I have it." For the first time, she truly trusted him. And for the first time in a decade, Silas felt the fierce, protective instinct that had nothing to do with a bounty. He wasn't just a bounty hunter anymore. He was a shield. He took the small wooden box from her satchel. Inside, a leather-bound ledger lay nestled among a few silver coins. He saw the scrawled names and dates, the towns pillaged and the banks robbed. This wasn't just a simple ledger. It was a roadmap to a dozen bounties. But more importantly, it was a target on Lily's back. The second plot point unfolded in the following weeks as Jed's shadows grew closer. They found a ransacked cabin on the trail to town, a clear message left for anyone who dared to help her. Silas began to teach Lily to shoot. At first her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the rifle steady, but his patience was unending. He stood behind her, his large hands guiding hers, his voice a low, calming murmur. "Breathe, Lily. Feel the weight of it. It's an extension of you." The scent of pine and gunpowder mingled with the smell of the sun on his leather vest. In those quiet moments, a different kind of tension grew between them, a warmth that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a nascent intimacy. He saw her not as a problem, but as a person, fierce and resilient despite her fear. She, in turn, saw past the bounty hunter's grim facade to the gentle, lonely man beneath. The third plot point was a moment of profound vulnerability. They sat by the fire one cool evening, the stars a brilliant, uncaring spray across the velvet black sky. He told her about his past, about the war and the men he had to hunt down to make a living, about the emptiness of a life lived for money and not for purpose. The words came out slowly, unbidden. When he finished, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of strangers, but of two people who had shared a part of their souls. "I'm sorry," he said, surprised by his own confession. She reached out and took his hand, her small fingers tracing the scars on his knuckles. "You're not a bad man, Silas," she said softly. "You're just a man who's had to do bad things to survive. There's a difference." In that moment, the lie they had been living vanished. The pretense of a marriage of convenience was gone, replaced by something real, fragile, and more terrifying than any outlaw. The bounty hunter who had sought a practical bride had found in a terrified runaway a purpose he never knew he was missing. The climax arrived with the force of a thunderclap. Jed Rollins and two other members of his gang stormed the ranch just after dusk, their forms silhouetted against the setting sun, their yells echoing across the canyons. They had tracked them, followed the silent trail left by a bounty hunter and a runaway girl. "Give us the box stone and the girl can go free," Jed shouted, his voice a cruel laugh. Silas had already positioned himself on the porch, rifle in hand. He had not prepared for them to come so soon. "She's not giving you a damn thing," he yelled back. Jed's men fanned out, one flanking the cabin while the other moved to the barn. The gunfight was brutal and quick. Silas took down the man on the flank with a single practiced shot, but the man at the barn got a shot off, hitting Silas in the shoulder with a sickening thud. The impact sent him sprawling, his rifle clattering to the porch. He was down and Jed was advancing on him, his revolver aimed at Silas's head. From inside the cabin, Lily emerged, her face a mask of determination. In her hands, she held the rifle Silas had taught her to use. The shot echoed not with the clean crack of a marksman, but with the desperate thunder of a beginner. The bullet went wide, but it was enough. Jed, distracted by the sudden, unexpected fire, turned his attention to her. "Stupid girl," he snarled, swinging his gun around. But that single flawed shot was all Silas needed. The pain in his shoulder was a searing fire, but he ignored it. With a roar of pure animalistic rage, he lunged for his own fallen colt. He fired twice, the sound deafening in the sudden quiet. The first bullet took Jed in the chest, the second in the head. Jed Rollins fell, a dead weight in the dust, the last vestige of Lily's past lying lifeless on the ground. Silas lay on the porch, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the world spinning in and out of focus. Lily was beside him in an instant, her hands shaking as she pressed a clean cloth to his wound. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes held a strength he had never seen before. "Silas," she whispered, her voice a plea. "Stay with me." The resolution was not instantaneous, but came in the slow, tender days of healing. Silas's shoulder mended, but the scars remained, a permanent reminder of the day he chose love over a bounty. The ledger was turned over to the sheriff, and the bounties collected were enough to secure a future for them both. The money was a symbol of his past life, now put to use for a new one. They were married quietly, not in a town hall, but under the vast, indifferent sky, with only a traveling preacher as a witness. There was no grand celebration, no fancy dress, just a man and a woman, standing together, their hands clasped. He wasn't the lonely bounty hunter anymore, and she wasn't a girl on the run. They were Silas and Lily Stone. She had come to him as a fraud, a lie, a desperation, but she was the answer to his prayers, a prayer he hadn't known how to utter. She had brought him not a simple life, but a full one, a purpose beyond himself, a love born from a dusty road and a shared secret. The sun still beat down on the Arizona territory, and the dust still stained the sky. But now, when Silas looked out at his ranch, he saw not a solitary expanse, but a home. And when he felt Lily's hand in his, he knew that sometimes the greatest treasures in life aren't the ones you hunt for, but the ones that find their way to your doorstep, bringing with them a different kind of justice, a different kind of peace.